Good afternoon. Welcome to the November 14th City of Apopka Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. If you will all join me for a moment of silent prayer and the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We do not have any minutes. Approval of minutes, we don't have any? Okay. All right. During the meeting, each item will have a time for public comment. People from the public to comment on the item in question. If anyone is here that has a planning and zoning related item that is not on the agenda tonight, now would be the time to be recognized and speak.
I have a question on procedure.
I'm sorry?
I have a comment or a question on procedure.
Okay. Name and address for the record, please.
Albert McKinney, 3603 Golden Gem Road, Apopka. Is it incumbent upon the city to advise residents prior to a meeting tonight so that there can be people present at public comment? I was led to believe that any item coming up on tonight's agenda would require 14 days prior notice. I believe that there may be one item tonight which doesn't fulfill their obligations to the city to do that, and therefore I question whether or not it would be valid that if there were any decisions made on that item tonight.
What item would that be?
I'll give you the item number.
Ordinance number 3038.
3038. I can answer questions if you desire.
8.
Yeah, that's Plymouth rental apartments.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Jim, would you like to respond to that?
That's the PD.
The mailers were sent
1027.
that was published. I don't remember what the ad was published.
Do we have the packet?
We have the proof. I sent it to
Okay. Gene's checking. The mailers were sent out on 1027. So it's well within the 14 days.
These are your postings. Okay. So mailers were sent on 1027. The flatbreads were posted 1026.
And the signs out in front were posted on 1026.
Very well. All right. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Ms. Sanchez.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Item number 1, 1700 West Keene Road, small scale future land use amendment.
Thank you. Good evening, Bobby Howell, Planning Manager. Items number 1 and 2, the applicant is requesting a continuance to a date certain of December 12th, 2023.
Very well. All right. Can I have a motion to continue?
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Washington, thank you. Second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Dewey, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Planning Commission, my apologies, if there is going to be a vote, you do need to take public comment on the vote.
On something we didn't hear?
It can be withdrawn at the applicant's request, which does not require a vote from you, but if it is a motion and a vote, you do need to take public comment on that motion to vote to change the agenda.
All right, we'll cancel that vote. Is there anyone here from the public who wishes to speak on this matter?
Which item is that?
You have to.
Public hearing items number 1 and 2 for 1700 West Keene Road. Land use and rezoning.
All right. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move to continue this one for the next meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Toomey. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Ryan. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right. Item number 2. Going to be a continuation, 1700 West Keene Road rezoning. Is there anyone from the public wishes to speak on this matter? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we continue public hearing number 2.
Thank you. Commissioner Mott, do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Washington. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right. Item number 3, ordinance 3032, small scale future land use amendment, SNP Properties. Owners, SNP Properties LLC, applicant Denny Shriver. Location, southeast corner of Plymouth Sorrento Road and Dowman Drive. Ms. Sanchez.
Gian Sanchez with the Community Development Department. Excuse me. This is a request to recommend approval of the future land use map amendment from rural settlement to mixed use for SNP properties. Subject properties are located on the southeast corner of Plymouth Sorrento Road and Dowman Drive, approximately 5 acres in size. There are currently an existing single-family and industrial warehouse buildings on the property. On September 20th, 2023, the properties were annexed into the city via ordinance number 3024. The properties also lie within the 1-mile radius of Kelly Park Road and State Road 429, which makes them subject to the KPI form-based code standards. Per the form-based code, these properties must have a mixed-use future land use designation before it's developed. The DRC recommends approval. The recommended motion is to recommend approval of the future land use map amendment from rural settlement to mixed use based on the findings in the staff report. Staff is available for questions.
I have a
Thank you.
question.
Does anyone have a question of staff?
I'm sorry to interrupt. you.
Commissioner Washington.
Thank you, sir. Good evening.
Good
How are
evening.
you?
Great.
Any idea how the owner may want to use this property after we change it to mixed use?
It's our understanding in our cursory conversation with the applicant that they are wanting to do some sort of medical mixed-use development on there. It might also involve a restaurant, but those are just cursory discussions.
And will the house remain?
I'm not sure. Initially, they thought so. I don't know if that's still the case.
Thank you.
Any more questions of staff?
Yeah, I have a question.
Commissioner Ryan.
That property doesn't have access to Dalman Drive, does it?
It does not.
Okay, I was just wondering why you're mentioning Dalman Drive. I'm good.
Okay. Any more questions of staff?
I have a question.
All right, Commissioner Toomey.
Did any of the adjoining property owners contact the city to express their opinions one way or the other?
Staff hasn't received any feedback from the community.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any more questions, staff? All right, is the applicant here? Do they have a presentation?
No, sir, I don't believe the applicant's here.
Okay. All right. Does anyone from the public wish to speak on this matter? All right, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board for discussion and a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to find the proposed change in future land use from rural settlement to mixed use consistent with the comprehensive plan and land development code, compatible with the character of the surrounding areas, and recommend approval of the future land use amendment based on the findings and facts presented in the staff report and exhibits.
Thank you, sir. Motion by Commissioner Washington. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Commissioner Ryan. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, ordinance number 43038, Plan Development, Rezoning and Master Plan, Plymouth Sorrento Apartments. Owners, Peggy C. Carlton Living Trust, half interest, Gary T. Carlton Living Trust, half interest, and Gary T. Carlton Living Trust. Applicants, Appian Engineering, Carol Luke Klassen PE. Locations, 750 and 922 Plymouth Sorrento Road. Ms. Sanchez.
Jean Sanchez with the Planning and Zoning Division. This is a request to recommend approval of the Plymouth Sorrento Road Apartments PD rezoning and master plan. The subject properties are located at 750 and 922 Plymouth Sorrento Road, east of State Road 429, north of US 441, and west of Plymouth Sorrento Road. The site is approximately 13.04 acres in size. The Plymouth Sorrento Apartments PD is a consolidation of two parcels totaling approximately 13 acres. The properties have current zoning designations of T transitional and CC community commercial, and have a future land use designation of HDR 25, high density residential, permitting up to 25 dwelling units per acre. The future land use designation was adopted based on the ongoing development trends and market demands for multifamily development. The PD proposes to construct 242 multifamily units with a density of 18.55 dwelling units per acre. The applicant has worked with staff to design the site to locate buildings and amenity, recreation, open space areas to ensure its compatibility with existing adjacent uses. This proposed multifamily development serves as a transition from the commercially intensive uses along US 441 and adjacent to State Road 429 to the existing single-family uses east of Plymouth Sorrento Road. Proposed ingress and egress points for the project are located on Plymouth Sorrento Road and on the southwestern portion of the proposed development on the intersection of Orange Avenue and US 441. Applicant has been coordinating with Florida Department of Transportation and Central Florida Expressway Authority in reference to designing the access in the Orange Avenue US 441 intersection. The applicant also proposes enhanced landscaping, building buffer of approximately 100 feet, and a decorative fence from Plymouth Sorrento Road. A dedication of a 30-foot wide right-of-way to the public is also provided along the project frontage on PSR. The amenity package includes a pool, a deck, club room, recreation, lawn fitness center, pet spa, and outdoor grills in the centralized open space amenity area. Additional amenities of a dog park as well as a 6-foot wide recreation trail surrounding the stormwater pond with benches and other amenity equipment are also proposed. The DRC recommends approval. The recommended motion is to recommend approval of the proposed Plymouth Sorrento Apartments change of zoning from T transitional and CC community commercial to PD plan development and its accompanying master plan. Staff and applicant are available for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. Anyone have questions of staff?
Yeah, I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Dumey.
So we looked at this one back in, say, April, May timeframe. In a high-level summary, what's different now?
I'm sorry?
And what's the summary of what's different now from then? Because last time we were having, the police chief was concerned about the traffic. I know we had a long discussion about the traffic flows exiting this property. So what's changed? Is if anything has changed between the presentation we
Well,
received
that might
in
be,
April?
is the applicant here?
Yes.
This is basically the PD rezoning. That's the difference.
Good afternoon, Chairman, fellow commissioners. My name is Jonathan Hewells with the Lowndes Law Firm, 215 North Yola Drive, Orlando, 32801. I also have in attendance with me the developer representative with 111 Residential, Eric Calverson, and the engineer of record, Luke Clayson with APN Engineering. Short answer is this is a different request that's before you today. What came before you in May was the comprehensive plan amendment, which we were seeking to go to high density residential 25. That ended up going forward to City Council. City Council transmitted that to the Department of Economic Opportunity in Tallahassee for expedited, coordinated state review. They had no comments. It came back, and that was adopted in October by City Council. So that the end and short of it, and I can get into my presentation and show you, is that not much has changed since what we had presented to you back in May. We gave you an abundance of information, even though we were just dealing with the comprehensive plan amendment, just to, I thought we wanted to be very open and candid with the community and with you, this board and City Council, about what was being proposed there. If we could switch over to my presentation, I'll just run through it briefly.
You can just.
Oh, thank you. Gene covered a lot of this, but I think everyone's familiar where the site is. But it's in the northeast quadrant of 441, and the 429 actually is right on the saddle of the 429. Just a confluence of uses in this area of the city. This is near where we're at here today. There's everything from industrial across the street to commercial just south of us to single-family residential, Plymouth Landing across the street. And of course, we have the 429 that's on our western boundary. As was mentioned, we just discussed the future land use is now HDR 25. It's indicated in this brown color. What brown that is in the eye of the beholder. But it still has the same zoning, and that's what we're here for today, to go to. We're seeking a planned development zoning. Originally, I think we were proposed to do a straight zoning designation, but through comments from City Council and as well as the applicant team wanting to propose PD, we thought that was a better zoning designation for this project because of the community interest, because it really locks in exactly what is going to be developed here through the PD process that can be achieved. For instance, although the future land use is high density residential 25, the project is proposing 242 units, which actually results in a density of 18.5 dwelling units an acre. So it's less than what the maximum would be permitted under the future land use. You all are familiar with the site, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Here is the conceptual plan we showed you back in May when we brought it before you, showing the access points both off Plymouth Sorrento and so the laser on top? Off Plymouth Sorrento, and then this other direct access onto 441 at that Orange Avenue signal. If you compare that to what's in this PD zoning that's before you, and it also, just to go over it just briefly, and Gene already did it, but obviously the whole idea is to cluster the two residential buildings central to the site, get them as far interior as possible. That allows for better buffering, additional setbacks. Here's the PD plan that's before you, and that's traveling in this portion, the rezoning, and it's very similar to what was presented. There's been a little bit change in the geometry based on feedback from FDOT and CFX on this signalized intersection access point, and that's reflected in this plan. This plan also gives greater detail that there will be dedicated turn lanes both on the northbound approach and southbound approach on Plymouth Sorrento. But in slight changes up here to the amenities, including where the dog park is located. This indicates where that trail will be around the stormwater pond on the north side of the project. We showed you these in May. We'll go through them again. These are just this is a conceptual elevation of what we believe this project's going to look like from the Plymouth Sorrento frontage. Here, what I'm calling conceptual elevations, but these are actual photographs taken from this developer's project that was just completed in Davenport over in in Polk County, showing how it will be amenitized. The idea being that this will be amenitized in a very similar fashion. Maybe not exactly looking like this, but at the same quality and finish. On the left side is a photograph of one of the residences at that community. And on the right side is the pool in that community. Now, the pool here may look a little different, but it's going to be, once again, of a similar fit and finish. Here is just a line of sight cross-section demonstrating that a setback that can be achieved here by clustering the buildings in the central part of the property. And what that allows us to do is provide 100 feet of setback on the property, which when then you couple it with the 30 feet of dedicated future right-of-way that's going to be there, the existing right-of-way, and then on the other side, the rear yards of some of the residences over in Plymouth Landing, what you get is a pretty large setback between building residences. If you were to take what the code minimum is for either commercial, if this property were to be developed as a commercial as it's zoned today, or the bare minimum for a residential project, that would put it at 25 feet, which is really like right here is where your building would end up being. And actually, it would be much closer if you had a developer come forward and not willing to dedicate the 30 feet of right-of-way for future road widening, which this developer is willing to do. This is just looking on the other side of the project towards 429, just demonstrating that, this area is if interesting in that you have the base elevation of the crown of 429 being much higher than what the base elevation of the property actually is. Here's the total cross-section, just putting it all together. Here's a conceptual line of sight from the fourth floor balcony looking out towards Plymouth Sorrento Road, kind of just different angles showing what that increased setback looks like from a line of sight view looking east. We talked about this last time, but it is a comparison that is relevant here in comparing the commercial zoning and the commercial entitlements that this property previously had, utilizing 100,000 square feet. That's not the maximum if you went by what's permitted by the code of what could be developed there as a commercial use, but comparing that to 250 dwelling units, we're actually proposing 242 now for the project. You have a massive reduction in vehicle generation between those two uses. This is from the ITE Trip Generation Handbook, which is the accepted methodology to be utilized when you're evaluating transportation generation of uses. The city has looked at this. What it shows you is that there's almost a 90%, it's actually 89% reduction in the PM peak hour trip generation between those two uses, and 87% reduction in total vehicle generation over the day. So this is just a comparison of what is the difference between going forward with a commercial project under what was the entitlements for commercial uses today versus this proposed residential PD. The maximum, if you plugged in, we don't think this could actually be achieved on the site once you park it and you actually put the stormwater, but it would be 142,000. We think 100,000 square feet is feasible of commercial uses. You have someone coming in that's going right to site plan. That narrows the opportunity for the city to negotiate, like has been done here in terms of getting dedication of right-of-way for how the site's going to look like. Instead, you're dealing with a site plan and not a rezoning and a comp plan as we have gone through here. And you really have a different looking project. You have a project that arguably could be built with minimum setbacks, pushes everything up towards the road, code minimum buffers. One important aspect, and it was important to City Council when we brought this before them on the comp plan is, and this is what's changed between when this project came before you in May and today, is on July 1st, SB 102 or Live Local Act came into effect. And that's the law that says if there's a commercial zoning, a property with commercial zoning, that it can be developed for workforce or affordable housing simply by running a site plan through the city. And that can be done at the highest densities available in the city, which here would be 25 units an acre. And that could be done by simply demonstrating that the code minimums for parking, for setbacks, for buffers are met. So that means you potentially have a site where a different developer, not this one, because 111 Residential has been pursuing this project for quite some time, well before July 1st, well before anyone even knew Live Local Act was a thing. It's just a different project that could potentially be built here. I can tell you, with those commercial entitlements, it would be an attractive site for that. But that's not what 111 Residential does. They do a different, they're looking at a different market level. I think we showed that through the fit and finish of what they just completed in Davenport and what they're intending here. That's just the comparison, and it's shown here what else is out there compared to what's being proposed here, what will be locked in through the PD process. And what's very important is on that PD plan showing those two different access points for this project, the one on Plymouth Sorrento and then the direct signalized access on Orange Avenue. Just as an update, we've continued conversations with CFX and FDOT on that access point. It's all been very positive. Pam Richmond here with the city has been a facilitator of those conversations, and it's all looking very good to be able to deliver that second access point. That's going to be potentially even a more primary point of access for this project, just because it is a direct signalized access. It gets you out to the 429 and a much faster movement. Coming out of that Orange Avenue, you make a right, and then you're on the 429. So.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you don't live here. There's no.
Sir, excuse me, sir. You're out of order. If you want to speak, you'll have a chance to speak. Please don't interrupt.
So with that, I guess I'll just wrap up my comments. It's been a process with staff, been a process with you all, been a process with City Council, but we appreciate the opportunity to come before you. Obviously, here to answer any questions, would ask an opportunity to address any public comments after they're made.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Hewell. Anyone have questions of the applicant?
I do.
Commissioner Washington.
I would say that last time you were in front of us, I think you knew I had a lot of agita over this project because of the traffic. And I was asking you about the possibility of the additional entranceway at the intersection of 441, 429. And I think at that point, you didn't know if it was possible at that time or not. I'm very happy to know that you got that in the plans. Thank you.
Yeah, it's reflected on the plans. We feel good enough that it's on the plans. Based on City Council comments, and we believe as well, it's integral to the success of this project.
Yeah.
And so things are looking really good. Obviously, you have to get an approved project before you can approach and finalize those legal documents to allow for that access, but that's proceeding.
And I appreciate the traffic study that you presented here so we can see the numbers relative to traffic on Plymouth Sorrento Road, commercial versus the PD. It's a substantial drop-off in traffic, which was my huge concern because, I think I told you before, I travel that road every day and it's a lot of traffic. So my issue was how it was being presented initially was not a good thing for me. But I can see now how the number of the activity coming out of the project is much less, which makes it much better for it to merge in with existing traffic. So that's a good thing. But now I still need your help with something else. I see the drawing, and we know that the post office is there. And right next to the post office is a trailer. There's a trailer.
Okay.
Did you know that?
What side of the post office?
Excuse me?
What side of the post office?
The north side of the post
North
office.
side?
Is right next to it.
Okay.
And then I believe you have trees. And then you have another private residence at the corner of the Connector Road and Plymouth Sorrento. So that's not part of this. But what's happening with the trailer? Is that not being affected by this proposal?
That's not on this property, and it's on the post office property, so it's if that's the one you're talking about.
Yeah, I am talking about that. So what about it?
It's on the post office property. It's not affected.
Yeah, but I'm saying,
If it's on the post office,
I know that, Jim. I'm just saying it belongs to somebody, and I'm saying, did that person sell out to this developer?
No, it's on the post office. So I don't know what is it a residential trailer? I apologize.
I believe
I'm not
so.
familiar.
I've seen people move, go in and out of the trailer over the years.
That's interesting. I don't have an answer for you, unfortunately. It's odd to me that
Ma'am,
it's interesting to me that the post office lease would allow
Excuse me, hold on, time out.
Yep,
Let him
sorry.
talk. Excuse me, you got it? Okay.
Yeah,
Go
sorry.
ahead, I'm sorry.
It's interesting to me that there would be the post office lease. Typically, those are 50, 100 years. So that post office is going to be there for quite some time, that they would allow for a trailer residential use. What I could tell you is that it's not on this property, and so we wouldn't have any control over that continuance of use. That would be for the post office or its landlord to.
Well, I never thought it was, where this trailer is, I never thought it was on the post office property. I understand that.
Okay.
But it's still there. And I was just curious how, when your project goes forward, what's going to happen with that piece of property?
There's a trailer in the parking lot, that's part of the SPS. This is residence,
okay.
that's part of our property.
Okay.
That's been demolished.
Okay. Let's go to a different map. Maybe we could shed some light on this, just so we're all on the same page. This is the post office.
Right.
There is a small home trailer, some residents here.
Yes.
That is part of this project. That is one of the owners today who would be selling their land to 111 residential.
Okay, that's
And so it would
that's
no
all I was
longer,
looking
it would
for.
longer cease
all I was
use.
looking for.
And I apologize for the confusion.
All right.
There-
And that piece of property becomes the stormwater, where the
Yep.
stormwater would be, right?
Correct.
now that we have the aerial, it helps.
Should have gone here first to the aerial, so I apologize for
Okay,
that.
thank you.
any more questions of the applicant?
I have a question.
Ryan.
Yeah, the medium you have painted, is that painted medium or is that raised medium on Plymouth Rento Road?
Our improvements are going to be just striped, painted.
They'll be painted, no raised, okay. Now let's go into your ADA accessible parking. You have the bare minimums for that, correct? Considering how many parking spaces you have?
Currently meets ADA standards, but
Yeah, the bare minimums. I can't tell from your building where the entrances are. There should be at least one ADA, accessible parking for people with disabilities at each entrance of the building. But I can't tell the way,
I need to caution you regarding this. It is the PD master plan. The construction site plan and the major development plan have not been completed. This is it's a good rendition, but it's not completed yet. In other words, the ADA parking spots. I've got generally the same comment in regards to the access for those ADA accessible spaces need to be as close to the main door as possible, and right now they aren't. And
I
so,
thought that was part of the master plan, okay.
And Jim brings up a good point. And this is the one slide I forgot to provide you, just kind of where we are in this process, kind of runs down where we've been, where we're going. If this project were to be approved as a PD, the next step would be that major development plan, which of course goes back through review cycle. That's where the details come. That's where it comes before this board and then city council for another review. And obviously we would have to be able to show and indicate to you, Commissioner Ryan, that those ADA requirements are met or
Yeah.
exceeded.
Please do.
got you covered.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Yes. Commissioner Washington?
I meant to ask one more thing. In between the post office and the gas station, there's a private residence there. Is that being absorbed into your project?
I'm going to go back to the aerial map.
Excuse me?
I'm going to go back to the aerial map, so just bear with me. Just maybe we have it on there just to be able make sure we're. So
You don't show it on that map.
right here, this
Right about
on-site
there,
property,
about
that's
there, yeah.
also on, within this subject
You've
property.
captured that, okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else have questions of staff? Or, excuse me, the applicant?
Okay, well, thank you.
I'll allow you to come back.
Thank you.
All right, does anyone from the public here wish to speak on this matter? Name and address for the record, please, sir.
Albert McKimmey, 3603 Golden Gem Road. Back in May, this turned out to be quite a contentious issue with a number of residents present. My concerns today is simply to ensure a fair and equitable hearing for both applicant and residents. Tonight, I see only 3 residents here. The question I ask myself, and the question that the residents have asked the city through public records request, is to define when the signage was put out and to supply accurate information. As of today, I found a new sign directly in front of the property, but it hasn't been there for the last couple of weeks. And I have been looking almost every day because I was aware this was going to be a contentious issue, and I wanted to make sure that everyone has a fair and equitable opportunity to come here tonight and make public comment. I'm very suspicious of why we only have 3 people here tonight. And the fact that the city failed to supply us with public records requests to show us when building actually received photos of the signage that was put up, which they're obliged to do, leaves me with some questions.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak on this matter? Name and address for the record, please, ma'am.
Kelly Butcher, 761 Plymouth Sorrento Road. This is the notice that was sent out. It is dated November the 3rd. I received it on November the 6th, Exhibit A. That was my notification regarding the change in the status of this hearing tonight. As far as the roadway study goes, I initiated a traffic study with Orange County. Those numbers that they're providing are very much out of date, and I don't believe they're accurate at all. I had several things. One of the reasons why it's no longer going to be HDR 25 is what I was told was ordinance number 2747, which allowed them to do some sort of change, whatever. That ordinance is being cut out. So they would have to go to HDR 20, is what I'm being told. Now, just down the street by the Bat Ranch, it's come to my attention that it's going to be 9 additional 9 4-story buildings for the senior living center. Okay, that mixed with what's going on over on the other side of this development and then this development, that's a little bit too much. Okay, also I've been in contact with DOT, and I did submit a request in June to deny their access to 441 in Plymouth and Orange Blossom Trail based on the issues that it would cause having their development there on 441. And if anybody wants to see pictures of what it looked like when I left my house and where the signs are, I'm happy to provide those. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak?
David Stankiewicz, 982 DeCleva Drive. I was here back in May when you guys denied this, and they brought nothing new to this project. All they brought was more information that says that they're going to expand this roadway. There's so much traffic on that street now that what they showed you and what this guy's talking about, I live there. I've been there 22 years. There's so much traffic on that road that putting these 260 people in these houses, and that's 260 if they only have one car. there's going to be 260 cars coming out that way on Plymouth Sorrento Road. I can't get out of my subdivision now because of the post office and the traffic that's on that street. Plus, where are these kids going to go to school? Where's the fire department going to be? Where's the police department going to be? The city doesn't have the money for all that stuff. Why are you guys are deny this, but yet the council approves it? What good are you guys doing here? That's what I don't understand. Why are you guys here to deny or approve? And if you deny, the city council says, oh yeah, we can do it. Somebody getting paid under the table or something on this. I just don't think this is the appropriate place to put 4 stories of apartment complexes. And it's just aesthetically terrible to put it in that particular spot. With all the apartments that are going up on Binion and the apartments and the stuff that's going up on Plymouth Sorrento Road, the traffic is going to get absolutely abominable. I mean, you guys keep approving everything up Plymouth Sorrento Road. Is there no other road to build on? I mean, my gosh, there's 5, 6, 7 different apartment building complexes going up, and the traffic, to what they showed and what I see every day, is not anywhere near. There's 7,000 to 8,000 cars a day coming up and down that street. What they showed is 400 or 500 cars. That's baloney. I live there. I know what it's like. And so I need for you guys to deny it again.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to speak?
Y'all are welcome to
Seeing none.
Trooper Stephen review.
Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board for discussion and a motion. Sure.
I just want to respond to your question, sir. Is that okay? So we're a recommending authority on a situation like this. We don't have the vote whether to approve it or deny it. What we do is we issue a recommendation to the city council, and the city council is the ultimate authority on this kind of situation. I do recall our discussion back in May when we were talking, I believe the police chief was here talking about the traffic concerns. And we did make a recommendation to deny the project. I did not follow up with the city council, so I don't know what happened with that. Sorry to say that. I just don't know what happened and what the city council discussion is, but we'll give it a fair look again tonight. That's all we can do. And we can make a recommendation of one action or the other, and then it'd go back to the city council. Now, to Mr. McKinney's point, one of the things that always concerns me is whenever, and we've talked about this before, people come to this meeting and they say, oh, we weren't aware that there was a development going on. And then they go blow up the city council. And that happened out at the airport with a couple different projects around there. So I'm just a little concerned about if people were aware that this was a meeting tonight based on the signage requirements, whether it was put out on the 3rd or the 27th, that concerns me.
Commissioner Dumy, why don't I start with that then? As it's already been confirmed by staff, and I'll reconfirm it here, not only did this this project get noticed once, it got noticed twice, and let me explain why. Original notice for this hearing tonight was sent out on October 27th by certified mail, in which the applicant team has to provide those certified mailing notices or receipts to staff, has to fill out an affidavit attesting to doing that, and has to post the property on that day, take photos, send that to staff. What happened after that is that the original notice said tonight's meeting was going to be tonight. The first reading at City Council was going to be on the 6th, and the second reading was proposed for December 20th. After that notice was sent out, the December 20th City Council meeting was canceled, which is not uncommon for local governments and city council to cancel their second meeting in December. And so what staff asked us to do was renotice it, changing that second reading date to from December 20th to the first meeting in January. And that had occurred, that was sent out on November 3rd. It still provided notice of this meeting, still provided notice of the first reading, and provided the updated notice of the second reading happening in January. So if anything, this project has been doubly noticed to the public of this meeting, the next meeting, and of course, the third meeting. And so that has been confirmed for you. I don't think there's any question from a staff or an applicant level that has been done and complied with.
Thank you for that.
Question, did the certified letters go directly to the residents?
Yes. So how that process happens is the city provides the addresses for the circumference of who gets notice, and I believe it's a 300-foot radius around the property from the property boundary. That's provided to the applicant. Applicant has to print out all the notices that the city prepares, get them stuffed in envelopes and get them certified mailed, get those receipts, provide them to the city as evidence.
Okay, so once you do that and prove it to staff, then you're able to move forward.
Yes, and you
That
show,
basically-
and you evidence that you've posted the property as well.
Okay, so it probably means that the 300-foot circumference?
Radius.
Radius wouldn't encompass all the residents in Plymouth Landing, but within that circle.
Right.
Okay,
But a fair amount, certainly,
Yeah.
and
okay.
the same amount that was noticed for the community meeting we had in January, the comp plan amendment hearing we had before you here in May, the city council meeting we had in June. So
Okay.
that process is followed. So just just real quick comments, this is, while it may not be a redevelopment project because a large portion of the project is wooded and not developed today, it's not an unentitled property when we started this process. It's not an unentitled property now. It had commercial zoning, commercial future land use. It was ready to go. It just hadn't happened yet. So I think what has been an important component of this project and possibly the best outcome possible for this property when it is actually developed into a use, because it's infill, it's right where city policy says you want development to happen and not result in urban sprawl, is this second access point that's being offered. And it's in a negotiation. That's what PD zoning is, and that's why it occurs here. If someone comes forward with a different project, whether it be commercial, whether it be under SB 102, the Live Local Act, that negotiation is short-circuited, and you're dealing with a project that's going to have a solo access point on Plymouth Sorrento Road. That it's acknowledged that is a difficult roadway. Perhaps this is the one project that can be the best outcome possible for that traffic volume by the diversion that's going to occur with folks using the signalized access at Orange Avenue. Happy to answer any questions of it.
Yeah, I have some questions. Were all the deadlines met for all the notices?
Yes.
They're all sent on a timely manner? Okay, what's the speed limit on Plymouth Sorrento Road? 45 miles an hour. I assume Plymouth Sorrento is going to be 4-lane?
No.
Never?
That's why we require the turn lanes at this stage. That is a county road, but we are requiring the right and left-hand turn lanes.
It's in their long-term
Yeah.
plan,
Yeah,
but it's not it has not been funded. Now, to that point, obviously, as part of this project is dedicating that right-of-way for no charge to the city, so that eventually when that road is turned over to the city, which will be eventuality, it's at least along this portion, there's satisfactory right-of-way available to make that road widening. You don't have to deal with approaching owners for that, seeing if they're willing to donate it. If not, then you have to result in some type of eminent domain taking, and that just complicates and makes the process costlier.
So it will be 4-lane at one time?
Yes.
We don't have a time frame on that, though.
I know we don't.
but we
There's a
do-
lot of
we are
roads,
getting
and
30
I realize
feet.
that. That's the problem.
Yeah.
We're supposed to provide or ensure adequate infrastructure. In my opinion, there's not adequate road infrastructure for this project.
Mr. Mott?
Now, I have a question. You had mentioned earlier in your presentation because I distinctly recall this coming to the planning council back in May. It subsequently went to the city council, and the city council referred, you said, to Tallahassee for them to, can you?
So part of the comp plan amendment approval process, and that's set forth in state statute, requires a transmittal to the state for review. And so what occurs there is it's a multi-departmental review. For instance, I believe FDOT looks at it, FDEP, DEO looks at it, and they have an opportunity to comment, and they could point out, and sometimes it does occur, it says, this project is not consistent with your own comp plan policy, and points out something. And then there has to be a change, or there has to be a comment letter, and there has to be an additional process before that project can go forward and be finally adopted. That went through, there was no comments. And so it came back to city council, it was adopted by city council.
And when you use the word, it was adopted by city council, you mean that the city council has now adopted the comp plan? Okay.
No. City council was on board if they got the second.
Ma'am, that's twice, okay? Please stop. You're not recognized, do not speak out in the meeting. Go ahead.
So it was approved, so it's now high-density residential, 25 dwelling units an acre. The project, as we discussed, is not that density. It's through the PD, it will be limited to 18 and a half.
In the current, as I read this and I look at this, the current zoning is transitional and C-C.
Correct.
Okay, that's the current zoning. So right now, with no need to even be reviewed by the planning council, any developer could come and meet transitional and C-C zoning and could present, drawings and plans to the development department and could be approved immediately.
Depending on what that looks like is what the approval process. If it was commercial, it would go through a development plan review, and if it's triggered thresholds, it could go before you, but it would be limited to, does it meet the requirements set forth the land development code for buffers, for setbacks? If it meets 25 feet, a developer could present that. If it was now under SB 102, if it's brought in as an affordable housing project, then it doesn't come before any reviewing board. It's processed at the staff level, and all it has to do is demonstrate that it meets minimum code requirements.
I think that happened a week and a half after that.
It did. It did.
Until, 102 happened, because I remember some discussions
Right.
on
And
this the following month.
There has been discussion about it. So, that could be a code minimum project at the highest density that can be achieved on that site without any review, without any negotiation, with one single access point on Plymouth Metro Road, or this alternative, which is negotiated, it's highly and thoroughly looked at and commented on, and 2 access points, lower density,
So
centralized.
Basically, what
buildings.
we're to decide tonight is, do we want to change the zoning from transitional and C-C to planned development?
Right, and lock in what's going to be developed there, and at what performance standards, and what setbacks, and what density.
What the definitions are, correct?
Yeah, another point that it's kind of been alluded to is that the setback from the road right away, the current road right away to the building is about 130 feet. With something that came in on the southern 10.9 or 10.8 acres, that could go with the 25 dwelling units per acre, and there would be no requirement for that type of a setback. They could actually put the building about 10 feet from the road.
Right.
So-
And no road dedication.
Yeah.
Okay. I have no-
Anyone else have questions? Okay, and I would comment that I think that the decision by the city council to approve that was in no small part influenced by what you had just alluded to. I don't want to say the lesser of the evils, because that would be disrespectful to your plan, but it's the better option, and it eliminates the possibility of us being open to what you had just said with the affordable housing, which would be detrimental. So I think that's one of the reasons, like the gentleman asked about the city council not necessarily following our recommendation, which they don't have to, or advisory board, but I think that had a great bearing on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, that just, the affordable housing issue is non-relevant, and to me, it sounds like a threat. We can't be anti-affordable housing in any way. We can't discriminate in any way.
No, I'm not, didn't say that.
I know you didn't say it, I'm just clearing the air.
I think the issue is the setbacks and the not having the ability to have any control whatsoever on the building, on that property or the development. In other words, don't care what they put in there. Don't care if it's, $1 million houses or it's a Section 8 housing. If we have no control and no say-so, the city council has no say-so, they can come in and do whatever they want. And I think that's the detrimental thing, not necessarily affordable housing per se, but the fact that we have zero control and zero input over what they do. I think that's.
I don't think it was mentioned that with the Live Local, there is no requirement to bring it before the planning commission or city council for any type of a review.
Right.
That's
do
the
whatever
option.
they want.
Now, the other part is not just the Live Local, but there's also the potential, because the lower portion of the 10.8 acre parcel is already CC, that could go up to, I think it's 120,000 square feet of commercial too. So, and there's no guarantee for a secondary access point there either. So it's.
Listen, I believe in property rights, as long as the land code is abided by.
Yep.
Which part of the infrastructure, adequate infrastructure is part of it. It is what it is. We're not here to change laws, we're just here to follow laws.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think this is, sorry.
Just for.
Commissioner Washington, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. For me, the whole thing about affordable housing, is that only an issue where the property is owned by the county?
No, it's any property that's currently zoned commercial, industrial, or mixed use. And that includes land use. So it's, we've got a lot of uses out there that could get the Live Local applied to it. The big thing is that there's property owners still have to be able to sell the property, whether or not they want that type of a product.
Thank you.
Commissioner Dumey?
No, my point, just up here on the board, is that we could wind up with worse position, but I just want to focus on this project. It could be better, or it could be worse. And this looks fine, but we're better off now from where we were in May because of the second entrance on 441. That's a big win, and the enhanced buffering would be a big win as well. But it's a tough call.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, we'll bring it back to the board for a motion. Sir, you had a chance to speak. I'll allow it. Come ahead. Your name and address.
Dave
again for the
Stankwitz, 982 DeCleva Drive. From what I'm hearing, there's two things. One is, they said they're putting in affordable housing. How do we know that there's going to be affordable housing?
Hang on. No, that was just a discussion of a rule to come. They are not putting in affordable housing. That is not what this development is. There is no affordable housing.
Okay, because that's my understanding is what ordinance that they keep talking about that says affordable housing.
Let me clarify. What happened is the state passed a law, I think it's a great overreach, to where if it's a commercial property, what is it, Jim? Commercial,
Industrial, or mixed use.
they can, a developer can come in and say, buy 20 acres and tell the city, oh, by the way, here's our plans. We're going to build affordable housing. And because it's affordable housing, the state has negated all our ability to do anything other than just look at the plans and go, yeah, if you're following the code, it goes up. no setbacks. We don't have these discussions. We don't have public meetings. The city council doesn't vote on it. We don't vote on it. It just gets done. And I personally think it's a huge overreach by the state, and I think at some point it's going to become a legal issue, but that's
Well,
out of
that's-
our purview.
That's my next question. Obviously, we have no control over this whatsoever. They can build whatever they want to build, and we have no control. You have no control.
not in
The
this
council
case.
has-
Not
The
in this
council has
case.
no control. Nobody has any control except for them.
No, not in this case. No, that only applies to the situation I told you where somebody applies for affordable housing. That doesn't apply here. We have the city council and the DRC and the planning zone, we make recommendations. The city council has complete control over that process.
And then I also heard him say about the eminent domain. Well, if they take they make that street wider, they're going to take our properties away from us and our backyards away from us. And going back to the letter, I've lived less than 300 feet away from this project, and I never received the letter. So I'm sorry, he's full of BS. And this whole project is a nightmare, and it's just a sham. I'm sorry, it's just a sham. And putting up that big complex on that corner, and adding all that extra traffic. I have a time, half an hour, sometimes 10 minutes to get out of my subdivision. The traffic is backed up from 441 all the way past the post office. I mean, this is ridiculous. They can't put that up. Unfortunately, the state's going to allow it.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, bring it back for discussion and a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to find the proposed Plymouth Sorrento Apartments change of zoning from T transitional and C-C to PD plan development and its accompanying master plan consistent with the comprehensive plan and land development code and compatible with the character of the surrounding areas based on the findings and facts presented by staff reports and exhibits.
Thank you, sir. Motion by Commissioner Mott. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Washington. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed?
Okay, motion carries. All right. On to site plans. All right. The request is an approval of the Aqua, I don't know if I'm saying that right or not, Aquara Estates plat. Ms. Sanchez.
Jean Sanchez with the Community Development Department. This is a request to recommend approval of the Aquara Estates plat. The subject property is located at 4448 Chandler Road, west of Jason Dwelly Parkway and north of Appy Lane, approximately 28 acres in size. The Aquara Estates plat is for consideration of a 76-lot residential subdivision and 11 tracts for landscaping, open space, stormwater, and pocket parks. The access points are proposed via Tigris Drive, which intersects with Jason Dwelly Parkway, as well as Silver Break Street on the north. The plat is consistent with the major development plan approved by City Council on April 6, 2022, and the construction plan approved by the Development Review Committee on February 24, 2023. The DRC recommends approval. The recommended motion is to recommend approval of the Aquara Estates plat based on the findings in the staff report. Staff and applicant are available for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. Anyone have questions of staff?
I got one quick question.
Commissioner Ryan.
I can't tell if there's sidewalks on Jason Dwelling Parkway. Are there sidewalks on there?
On Jason Dwelly Park, yes, sir.
I can't, yeah, is there a setback from the, I just don't see it on the drawing. Is there a setback on the?
Well, it was
On the
on the
sidewalk?
construction site plan and major development plan. This is the subdividing of the lots. So it doesn't have all those details for the sidewalk.
We will have a sidewalk, okay, because all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else have questions of staff? Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. Is the applicant here? Do they have a presentation?
No.
Okay. All right. Does anyone from the public wish to speak on this matter? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend approval of the Aquara Estates plat.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Washington. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Commissioner Ryan. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right. Item number 2 on site plans, residences at Emerson Park plat. Mrs. Sanchez.
For the record, Jean Sanchez with the Planning and Zoning Division. This is a request to recommend approval of the residences at Emerson Park plat. The subject property is located at 1601 Austin Bay Boulevard, east of Apopka Road, northwest of Austin Bay Boulevard, and south adjacent to Emerson Park Townhomes. It's approximately 14.23 acres in size. The residences at Emerson Park plat has been submitted for consideration of a townhome subdivision with 103 units, as well as 14 tracts for recreation, open space, right-of-way access, and drainage easements. Access is proposed on Austin Bay Boulevard via Claim Road, as well as an emergency access easement in the southwestern portion of the subdivision adjacent to Greystone Assisted Living Facility. The plat is consistent with the major development plan approved by City Council on September 16, 2020, and the construction site plan approved by the Development Review Committee on April 23, 2023. The DRC recommends approval. The recommended motion is to recommend approval of the residences at Emerson Park plat based on the findings in the staff report. Staff and applicant are available for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. Anyone have questions of staff?
I actually do have a question. Ms. Sanchez?
Yes.
If I recall correctly, there was some discussion a 3 meetings ago about the HOA and from the community to the east of this location. And if I recall correctly, it was in relation to where the road or entrance or whatever. Did that get resolved or?
It's a little bit, it's sort of resolved.
Okay.
So actually, there was a proposal initially for this project to have connection on this road right here, and I think it's Seaburn Avenue. If I recall correctly, initially HOA agreed to have that connection there, but they rescinded that agreement. And we require at least 2 access for this project at the time. And so the resolution was to have an emergency access on Greystone. There's an easement
Oh,
on
okay.
there.
Oh, okay, okay. So it's emergency only?
Right.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any more questions of staff? Anyone has questions of that? Anyone here from the public wish to speak on this matter? Seeing none, bring it back to the board for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we recommend the approval of the residences at Emerson Park plat.
Thank you. Motion by Commissioner Mott. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Doomy. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right. So, we do have some old business. Do we have, Stu, any new business? Get that out of the way.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Andrew Han, our city attorney for the Planning Commission, is going to do a little presentation regarding quasi-judicial hearings and what they are all about. I feel like I should be introducing him like Vanna White or something, but
I think I'll just do it up here, Jim, so I don't
Okay.
have to run 2 slideshows. But I do need to bring up the slideshow.
that one, just keep going.
Just keep going.
Yeah, with the arrow. There you go.
Okay.
Keep going. There you go.
Here we go, quasi-judicial hearings. All right.
This is, by the way, this is the first of, I believe, 3 presentations that Mr. Hand will be doing in regards to getting all of us educated in regards to this part, legal proceedings, things that you all need to know.
Okay, thank you. Planning Commission, I first gave this presentation in Apopka back in 2015 to this board at the time, as well as City Council. And this is It's actually just a short PowerPoint. I'm not going to take a whole lot of your time, especially at the end of the meeting. Just going over some of the differences between the different types of hearings that you see here and some of the standards of review when you go through these hearings. Basically, these slides I've adapted. They're designed for sort of an annual type of review to just take a look at everything, and something that I used when I was teaching at UF at the law school there. So just getting started, what I want to differentiate is the difference between legislative and quasi-judicial hearings, and you had both tonight. Boards are best when you first see something on an agenda, and first thing that should go through your mind is, what kind of a hearing am I in? Because it impacts how you'll make your decision, the procedure that you'll make your decision, and if there is an issue legally or a challenge, how that would be challenged and what the outcome, well, not so much the outcome, but what would be at stake in a legal challenge, because it's different for these types of decisions. Legislative actions, what you're most going to see is, as far as legislative action, are comp plan amendments. Those are always legislative. And it gets a little bit confusing. When I get into quasi-judicial, I think it'll be making more sense. But legislative, it's an action by a governing body. It's legislative when it's adopting a policy that will have general application to similarly situated properties, or the policy will be applied later based upon facts about particular situations. That is generally true. However, a lot of times when you're seeing a comp plan amendment, it might be for something very specific, a very small parcel. So there was a lot of confusion, and I won't belabor the point, but there was confusion when the state first went to this system of planning. When you're doing a site-specific comp plan amendment, is it quasi-judicial or just legislative? And ultimately, the courts decided it, and that any type of a decision when it comes to comp plan amendment is legislative. And that's important. We'll come back to that. Quasi-judicial. When you are reviewing something quasi-judicially, the best analogy is to think of yourselves as judges. And a quasi-judicial item is quasi-judicial if there's a limited number of people or property that's affected, something very specific. You have identifiable parties and interest. Decision is contingent on facts because you're sitting there as a interpreter of the facts, making your decision based on those facts. That's why at the first meeting when I was here, I brought up findings. And we'll get into those findings a little bit. They're very important when it comes to quasi-judicial decision makings and defending those decisions if they're ever challenged. Decision can be viewed as policy application rather than policy setting. That's another good way to know that you're in a quasi-judicial hearing as opposed to a legislative hearing. So, quasi-judicial. Again, sitting as a judge, you're hearing evidence. You heard some of that tonight when you're looking at rezonings. You're hearing from witnesses. Now, it says witnesses must be sworn. This is something I prepared, as I said, back in 2015. I missed that when I was reviewing this, or I would have taken it out, because here in Apopka now, nobody is sworn in at these hearings. Partings to the hearings, what we saw tonight, we had members of the public here. You have parties, hearing participants, and there's differentiation between how these individuals can participate in the hearing. We didn't see anybody that I saw tonight speaking as just a member of the public. What I saw was affected parties, and we'll get to that, because of the proximity to the development. And they have specific rights. And it was handled just right tonight as far as their participation, because affected parties have a heightened participation, a heightened ability to interact with you and with the parties during these hearings. So, first of all, you have the parties who, the applicant are typically the parties. They have to be able to present evidence, cross-examine witnesses, and be informed of all the facts. Hearing participants, in other words, those affected parties, are allowed some measure of due process, because that's ultimately what we're protecting here, everybody's right to participate and that due process, so it's not violated. They may be allowed to cross-examine, but don't have all the same rights as parties. They can present evidence. As board members, you are all confined to the facts, what you hear as evidence to make your decisions at these hearings. So I didn't see it, but sometimes in other jurisdictions, some of the cities that I represent personally, I've had circumstances where members of a board, you all know your community. Members of boards know their communities. Planning commissions know their communities. And so you have to be careful to ask questions to staff, to the parties, to get your answers rather than to spout, the facts that you know, because that is amounting to a judge testifying. So always important to elicit, what you want to hear, even if you already know the answer, just as a judge would. So important to keep that in mind. Again, hearing participants, they have some of those due process rights. Now, while you might ask for public comments, at the end of the day, the general public does not have those rights. And what we used to do in Apopka, we actually would have an affected party determination. Now, Apopka is following the county process a bit more, so we don't do that anymore. But a member of the public doesn't have the right to cross-examine witnesses like the individuals here who lived in very close proximity. In other words, because they were receiving notices, because they were in that 300-foot range, they have an ability to participate that a general member of the public wouldn't, and you have the obligation to hear their evidence and the evidence that they elicit from parties and from staff. Okay. Quasi-judicial hearing procedure. I used to have kind of a list and a rundown, and I changed this a bit for this presentation simply because Apopka goes through a little bit of a different process. But it's important to remember that those affected parties do have particular rights, and if there ever is an issue with a member of the public, or you can always come back to me, ask me a question, is this somebody who has a specific right to participate, a heightened right to participate in a hearing. And again, I think the notice is a good indicator. But there might be someone who lives 303 feet away or along those lines, and you can make those determinations whether or not they have those due process rights. One of the things that we go through, if ex parte disclosures, if when you're sitting in a quasi-judicial hearing, if you've received information in advance or had discussions, or if an applicant, came to you and had a discussion with you, you have the opportunity to disclose that. And what that can do is it prevents, to some measure, the possibility of a prejudicial situation, because again, you're sitting as a judge, you make that disclosure and you have the ability to make that disclosure so that everybody else here who has a due process right can hear that and can ask you questions to make sure that the issue is being heard fairly. Okay. One other thing I'll say too, this is a very informal presentation. We're already, good of the way through it. If you have any questions for me, feel free to interrupt me. And with the other ones that I'll be doing
I
here.
do have a question.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So, ex parte, where is it listed on the staff report? You said there was some ex parte tonight. Where is it listed on the staff report?
I'm not, where's what listed on the staff report?
You said there was some ex parte.
Ex parte?
No, I'm sorry.
Quasi-judicial.
Quasi-judicial, sorry.
Okay.
Where is that listed on the staff report?
It's not listed on your staff report. What I'm telling you is that. We have a copy of the staff report?
No, it is.
Oh, I don't have the staff report, I just got the agenda.
The agenda, that works.
So the quasi-judicial, you have to ask whether there's been any ex parte, right?
I can't hear you. You're.
Hit your button.
Sorry about that. I didn't hit my button. So under the quasi-judicial hearing, you have to ask if there's any ex parte, correct?
You have the opportunity to make a disclosure, but I don't believe it's part of the Apopka process now to have a formal ex parte period.
All right, well, let me ask, because, and you can correct me, but I thought the only time that was applicable here was during a variance or a special exception where we were the final judgment of that issue. I didn't think it applied to anything that went from us and went up to city council. Because the only two things that we have the final judgment on are those two. And so in every case, that says quasi-judicial and asked about the ex parte communication.
If it's-
Treated as such.
Right, and I understand. There's those two types, quasi-judicial and legislative. And so if it's ultimately even if you're not the final arbiter, the final decision maker, it's still going through that quasi-judicial process because you still have an applicant who is providing evidence. You're still making your decision based on the facts. And even if you're not the final decision maker, it's still a quasi-judicial process from beginning to end.
Okay. Is it necessary for me to ask the members of the board if they've had any ex parte communication on each item or only on the
Only on things that would be quasi-judicial. With legislative, that's not. So on this particular agenda, I guess that's part of a two-part question, but you never would do, those kind of disclosures on a legislative item like a comp plan amendment. Now, it's advisable to allow or to ask for ex parte disclosures, to ask for anything that is quasi-judicial. But since it's not adopted as part of the procedure, it's not a fatal flaw if it's not. But best, to ask if.
So anything that would be quasi-judicial, it's preferable to ask just for.
Preferable to ask would be my recommendation.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't want to miss any ex parte disclosures. That's my concern here.
I have a question for you. How will we know if it's quasi-judicial unless you tell us?
Well, that's part of the purpose of the presentation. But what I will tell you, so for instance, when I gave this presentation or when I represented this board 10 years ago, that was part of the whole education from the get-go. It's not something that, I think that someone who's brand new to a board, necessarily gets right away. It took me a while to get some of this stuff. Now it seems very, very simple to me since I've been doing it for so long. But, when I first was going through it, reading cases in law school 20 years ago, whatever it was pretty confusing. So, that is something that if you're ever confused about it, you can catch me before the meeting, ask me, hey, what procedure is this in if you're a little bit confused. But I like my boards, to really just kind of get in their head, well, what am I sitting, what am I doing, what role am I playing is the first thing that they think about when they're sitting down and looking at agenda, maybe even before you even get here when you're first reviewing the agenda for the first time, in the packet.
Well, one reason why I asked that is in previous meetings, when we got an agenda, it was noted on the agenda that it was quasi-judicial.
That is helpful.
And that was.
Thank you, it is very helpful. That's the reason why I asked the question. That would help us.
But, and if I recall, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or Aaron, maybe you will know. It was only on a variance or a special exception was the only time I saw quasi-judicial on the agenda. So that might be leading to some of the confusion because there's more than just those two is what you're explaining here.
There is
It's not
more.
legislative, then it's quasi-judicial.
Exactly. And on these cases, where it can be a little bit confusing, those will always be quasi-judicial. Plats are even quasi-judicial. But plats are a lot easier because you're just really, a plat has to be approved if it meets the checklist, right? You're not really considering in the detail the different factors and facts that you are with something like a variance. But zonings, on the other hand, zonings can be legislative or they can be quasi-judicial. An example of a legislative zoning matter, and you probably don't see those too often, would be something, remember that first slide I was saying, something of general application that's broad. So if staff is either via staff or via a contract planner who's doing something very specific and, doing a broad zoning, like a big rewrite to the zoning code and redoing the zoning maps, for a number of properties, that would be legislative because it's affecting broad policy. Now, if it's a site-specific rezoning that's affecting just one or two property owners, quasi-judicial in that case. And I'll talk a little bit about that because there's a burden of meeting a standard that shifts with that. And I'll touch on that in a minute. That's important to know. So, sure, I mean, that's something I'm sure that can be accommodated to include it on the agenda if that's helpful to you all. very welcome. But this is the typical process, and if it's something that you're a bit more familiar with in the essence of special exceptions and variances, sure, you have your ex parte disclosures. What we saw tonight, of course, staff presentation, petitioner has their ability to present, and you have members of the public who speak either as just members of the public or affected parties, as we saw this evening, who didn't avail themselves of all of their rights and so forth, but they did interact and did ask questions and receive those answers from the petitioner. From that point, you have rebuttal, closing, you have your deliberation and vote. That's the typical process in a quasi-judicial hearing. So the burden of proof, that's what I was mentioning just a moment ago and thinking about rezoning, and this is an example. If you have a landowner who's seeking to rezone property, well, that landowner, that petitioner, that applicant, they have the burden of proving that their proposal is consistent with the comprehensive plan and complies with all of the procedural requirements in the city's code to accomplish their objective. So once they've gone through and they've provided evidence that they've met all those standards, and everything that we saw this evening was supported by staff. That's not always the case, but generally it is, because if there's a problem, it's usually worked out beforehand. But I've been here, and I've been in a number of other jurisdictions where petitioner wanted to go forward and perhaps they didn't have staff support. And if that was the case, after the petitioner has gone through and provided evidence and so forth, and met that initial standard, not saying they're right, but after they've hit all of their evidence and gone through that, if all of that was true, it would be on the burden of the government through their testimony, through staff testimony, through staff produced evidence to demonstrate that maintaining the status quo, the current existing zoning classification, accomplished a legitimate public purpose, essentially providing you with the evidence that you need to make your decision to vote no. In other words, to vote no on something that's quasi-judicial, you have to have evidence, or at least have some sort of a standard where that petitioner didn't meet, in your view, did not meet their burden initially. Okay? Any questions about that? That one kind of gets a little bit confusing, I think. Definitely confused me at first. I know all of you have been doing this for a while, so.
So if the staff say we'll take a zoning and the applicant meets all the criteria, but staff disagrees with it.
Right. So in that case, you're sitting up there as a judge, right? So you're looking at facts. And just like in a criminal case, you're going to have, one expert saying one thing, one expert saying another. You're judge and jury. So you're listening to those, and ultimately that would become a decision if it meets what competent substantial evidence is, because that's what you have to base your decision on. I'll talk a little bit about, it's right here. We're about to talk about that. But you would be making your decision which one you find more credible, because you have the applicant who's saying, look, guys, we met all these standards, and you're having staff say, no, you didn't. And here's the testimony, here's the evidence why you're not meeting it. The applicant's saying, yes, we met all the standards, and here's why. Well, these are two, whatever is being said is going to, at some point in there, maybe it's not polar opposite, but it's going to be contradictory. And so you, as the board member, as the decision maker, are going to decide which version of evidence you find to be more credible in ultimately coming to your decision. Because at the end of the day, once you get to make your decision, if you vote no on it, you have to have findings. And you have to make your decision based upon all those findings. And so if you're going to tell an applicant, thank you, but no, we find staff more credible, ultimately you're going to have to tell them why, especially in a case where you are the final arbiter and you're the final decision-making board. So in those cases that we were talking about, when it comes to variances, special exceptions, there's actually going to have to be a denial order issued that is going to tell that applicant exactly why you said no. And you would say, well, sorry, we heard your evidence, but you didn't meet D, E, and F because we found this to be credible in opposition to what you presented, right?
So-
So it's basically like in a court of law that the judge knows the law, and he or she judges based on the law. So that's how people lose or win cases. So I think you're basically saying that's us.
That's you,
We
correct?
need to know the law and hear the evidence and make a judgment.
Exactly.
So we would need to know if it's a zoning issue, we need to know the zoning requirements or the law in Apopka.
Right,
in
and that
order-
should all be part of the staff report. So you're seeing, well, you're going to hear, that evening, you're going to hear testimony, like I said, from both the applicant, from the staff, and that's why when you look through the staff report, you see all the criteria listed out, because you're making your decision based on criteria, and there's a checklist. This is met, this is met, this is met, this is met, this isn't met. And so,
So, so if staff is doing all this work, which they always do, they do a magnificent job, but you're saying that the applicant could have an issue with what staff is saying?
sure, because you can have a situation where, as I said, it's something that doesn't happen too often, thankfully so, because if staff and an applicant are at odds, usually that's worked out beforehand. But we've had, situations in the past where an applicant wants to go forward and they think they're right and staff does not support the applicant. And then it's a matter of what evidence is presented and who are you going to listen to, staff or the applicant.
So what you're saying, and I have not attended all, but I attend a good portion of the development review meetings. And what I've seen so far is that the DRC works diligently with any entity to resolve any one of those situations prior to actually being moved to the planning council. I mean, this is new that tonight that potentially someone could say, even though you're not in agreement, please send it to the planning council. Certainly, I would definitely want to see that on the agenda as, and obviously in the staff report, it does say that. And there's numerous questions in the staff report that says, did they meet? Yes, 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 through that process. So from my experience so far, and I would say probably easily, it's probably close to a year, DRC meetings that I attend. On rare occasions, I'm not able to make it, but the staff here works diligently to resolve every one of those issues before it ever even shows up on our agenda.
Sure. And that is the norm, and that's the way that it should be. It shows you that you have a good system working and a good group of people that are trying to get you the answers that you need to have to make your decisions. Where I think perhaps that where you do see more opposition, and you don't see this too often either, but perhaps you'd see it more often, is you have an affected party or someone who lives close in proximity to a development. They have a due process right to participate. They have a due process right to present evidence. They have a due process right to cross-examine witnesses. And sometimes they show up in a rather sophisticated manner. They're bringing a lawyer. They have their own presentation to make, and they might be asking questions, both applicant and staff, saying, hey, guys, hold on a second here. I see that all of you agree that the criteria is met, but what about this? What about this? And they might bring out something, and maybe something, I've been to hearings before where something was missed and then it was denied or continued and, hey, they resolved it with, and in fact, I've been that attorney sometimes, where I represented a homeowner in front of a different city and pointed something out. And then typically what would happen from there, the board continues it or denies it. And then, hey, staff and the applicant call that attorney and kind of work everything out and hopefully, come to some sort of an arrangement to fix something. But that's just sort of an example where you probably do see some more contention, from folks, those affected parties that live in proximity to a proposed development. Sure. Sometimes they do bring attorneys, sometimes they don't.
Let me clarify, you said the affected party, an affected party ability or their rights within the meeting, how does that differ between just a person that's public commenting? In other words, somebody who lives a mile away from the subdivision or the plat or whatever we're working on.
So technically, you don't have to consider the comments, and really you shouldn't consider comments from the general public on a specific development because that is not evidence. You are confined to
listen to evidence. Now, I think that, some jurisdictions don't take public comment. They just hear from the affected parties on quasi-judicial matters. Personally, I think that doesn't have a tendency to go over well, and it confuses the public. And so typically in most jurisdictions, you hear the public comment and hear their concerns, but ultimately that's not what you're basing your decision on. If you are basing it on, public comment, that should be coming from an affected party, someone that has a stake in that particular issue.
Right, you would weigh something from a affected party greatly versus a public comment.
Right, because as we said before, or as I was in discussion, you can only consider evidence. And so only these parties, only, staff, petitioner, and these affected parties are the only ones capable of producing, providing evidence. A member of the general public doesn't have those due process rights to present evidence. So, competent substantial evidence, there's two words in front of evidence. It's the same thing. These hearings are not as formal as a court of law, obviously. And the competent substantial evidence standard is what we look at if there's a challenge. So in other words, if this board made a decision, or any board that hears quasi-judicial matters, one of the things that an attorney would be looking at, was there evidence to support that? And so, great question. We were just talking about members of the public and what ability they have. If we went through a special exception hearing and you heard all the evidence from the petitioner, you heard all the evidence from the city, and then a member of the public comes up and says, what's a good example here? I mean, it could be as simple as, hey, I don't like this, I don't want this development anywhere near me, and you vote it down. We'd be looking at, or if there was a challenge, from the petitioner because it was voted down, they'd be looking at, well, was the decision of the board made upon competent substantial evidence? If it was voted down simply because a member of the public came up and said, hey, traffic's a problem. I don't think you should support this because traffic's a problem. That is not competent substantial evidence. So, that is a situation where a decision that is made by a board, if it was made based upon that, could be overturned. It's different if an affected party is bringing evidence and has an expert and they're going through a traffic study or presenting something along those lines that's contradictory. That becomes competent substantial evidence. In the next few slides, I'll kind of explain to you what competent substantial evidence is and what that standard is, because that's the standard when you're making decisions that you're looking for, when you're looking at whether a burden has been met.
Question. So tonight, we considered a project on Plymouth Rental Road, and the petitioner presented a traffic study, which showed the traffic flow with a commercial versus a PD project, and it was a substantial difference in the traffic. So would you say that study provides evidence
Yes.
that can be considered solely for the decision? And even though the neighbors, rightfully so, they live there, they'll say that's junk, it's worthless. That means nothing. Is that what you're saying?
Well,
Your comments?
a traffic study, well, yes, because, and it depends on a matter of degree, what their comments are. Simply saying something is junk isn't evidence in of itself.
Excuse my language.
But if you have somebody who goes through that and points out, or if you have an expert with you, or you can go through and point out flaws in that traffic study, that's like cross-examination, right? It's not just making a conclusory statement saying, hey, this is junk. Show us why it's junk. Now that becomes evidence.
Okay.
Different story. So here, I'm going to read some of this stuff, not because I like reading slides, I don't, but this language that I pasted into these slides, these next two or three, is language directly from court cases, as courts first struggled to figure out what standards to apply to quasi-judicial hearings like 30 or 40 years ago. And, this is the language that the courts came up with to tell you all as decision makers what competent substantial evidence is. Because it's not something that, it's not totally tangible, right? I mean, there is you have to look at something and come to the conclusion whether it's evidence or not. It's not just labeled right in front of you, evidence like we see on TV in a bag. We don't have that at these hearings, right? So competent substantial evidence is legally sound, sufficient and admissible under the rules of evidence if we were sitting in a courtroom, although it doesn't have to comply with that level of formality. It has to be real, non-speculative, non-hypothetical, and based on facts. Reports are based on facts. Simply to say in the future, oh, there's a ton of traffic, this is just going to bring traffic in, that is speculative. Now, producing a study or producing an expert that can say, listen, this development is going to be just like this development, here's why they're like each other, and this is going to be that effect, that could be evidence, especially if it's coming from an expert witness. So it's real, it's based on facts, it's more than just conjecture, unsupported, generalized statements. That's kind of what we're talking about when we hear, some of those, the statements that we hear from general public sometimes. Not just surmising, not mere probabilities, guesses, whims. It has to be reliable, credible, and believable. And of course, that's a movable standard. That's what you're charged with deciding. It has to be material, pertinent, relevant. Sometimes we hear objections and so forth to something that doesn't have anything to do with that hearing, right? It tends to prove points, must be proven. It establishes a reasonable, substantial justification for the point argued, and a reasonable mind was accepted as enough to support the argued for conclusion. This is a sentence I put together to really just kind of sum everything up back when I was teaching this. Competent substantial evidence is real, fact-based, material, reliable evidence that tends to prove the points that must be proven, and a reasonable mind would accept it as enough to support the argued for conclusion. So that's the best definition I can give you based on the case law of what competent substantial evidence is. And, I think it's important to realize that we're all individuals, and you're allowed to, make your determination whether something is evidence, and, your belief that something is evidence might be something a little bit different from what somebody else sees on the board. Ultimately, you're trying to get in line with what a judge might see if they're reviewing the decision, and you can always ask for assistance from whether it's me sitting in that chair over there, or one of my colleagues or somebody else, whatever attorney's representing the city, to help you if you ever have a question as to what's evidence.
So I have a question.
Sure.
The competent substantial evidence is presented, and this council decides to vote against it. What is the recourse and what is the exposure of the council who essentially disregards competent evidence?
Well, your decision could be overturned if it's challenged.
Which would then move to the city council.
Well, in that case, it wouldn't be ripe at that point, ripeness, a legal term. It wouldn't be ripe to challenge until you had a final determination made. But what would happen in that case is, there'd be a lawsuit filed, and it depends on where, the applicant or affected party, whoever's challenging that decision, because they can challenge it too. We're not just saying an applicant who got denied would be the one to challenge it. But whoever's challenging it, they're going to find some kind of a flaw somewhere along the lines, and that's what the court is going to take a look at, right? And was there a due process violation? Is it just a matter of a factual determination? So, there's not, unless there's some sort of denial of due process or something that wasn't disclosed. I mean, it's not something that really affects individuals. It's just the decision. You want to protect your decisions as essentially a sovereign appointed board. And so that's what's really at stake. Mm-hmm.
Question.
Sure.
So if we didn't believe the accuracy of a traffic study, and what should we do? Well, should we deny the application and then make a motion to have another study done that we can look at? What would we do?
If a traffic study is something that is
I'm just using that as an example. But go ahead.
It's a good example. And if there's a decision that involves a traffic study, and that's a very important part of that particular decision. I mean, hey, I've seen some great traffic studies, and I've seen some that are junk. I mean, just as all you have, no doubt about it. And, while your decision has to be made on evidence, the thing to do would be to ask those questions of whoever produced the traffic study or the applicant. Like, I don't understand, I mean, I've seen some of these before. Is this in here? Why isn't this here? What led you to that conclusion? And if at the end of the day, you don't find that study, the individual who's testifying to that study, credible, that would be a reason for the denial and a reason for you to make a finding that, that the burden wasn't met, whatever the burden is that corresponds with that traffic study, that list of criteria, right?
Could the board ask for a second traffic study for comparative analysis? And if so, who would be responsible for that?
I got to jump in. One of the things that staff does look at, and we've got a couple different people that are extremely familiar with traffic studies, is that if we find that it's not credible, we're the experts. We're the ones that are doing the review. If we don't feel that that's, and we've had them do another separate traffic study before. But by the time it gets, again, I think Mr. Ryan, I think Mr. Mock both said we're pretty thorough on our reviews before it even gets to you for these reviews. That's why we typically don't bring things that we're going to recommend denial because if it doesn't meet code. But we do critique those pretty thoroughly. And if you actually, as a board, look at the traffic studies and you understand them, that's when you could say, yes, I don't believe this is correct. But you do need to understand it before you just object because you don't think it's correct. What's not correct about it? There's multiple locations, multiple turn radiuses. There's so much into these it's like the thickest part of any approval that we have is the traffic study. And that's where we got to rely on the experts to do it. But we've gone back and told them we don't think this is the correct thing, or you're not taking into account a certain street. We've had projects that are going in Orange County that didn't do a traffic study, and we told them why. Why aren't you doing a traffic study? They aren't necessarily requiring it. Orange County didn't require one on Martin Road. We required it, and they obliged us by doing a traffic study to show where those were. But that's where some jurisdictions don't require them. We do.
And Jim beat me to it. I mean, that's where I was going to go next. Yeah, asking staff engineer who reviews those traffic studies, those questions too. You're going to hear that from the applicant. You're going to hear from the city as well, from their experts, and you have the ability to ask those questions.
Okay, so the traffic study that was presented as part of the Plymouth Sorrento Road project, we need to have faith that that traffic study is accurate. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yes. And as one of the people that did get up and mentioned that there was a traffic study that Orange County was conducting, yes, Orange County is conducting a traffic study in cooperation with the city of Apopka and with FDOT and CFX. Those take a long time to complete. I mean, sometimes they're half a year to do a traffic study that has to do with FDOT, because FDOT basically is also corroborating the numbers that are being presented. And one of the things you can't do is delay a project because you have something maybe coming. So we got to rely on the most accurate information that we can get in the first place. That'll definitely help later on, though.
That answer those questions? Okay. So some of the things that competent substantial is not, hypothetical, speculative, fear, or emotion-based generalized statements that do not address the relevant issues, and although perhaps politically persuasive, cannot be reasonably said to support the action advocated. Those are not components of competent substantial evidence that's presented. I've had situations before where maybe it was a long hearing, and I think in this case it was a council member who grabbed me once at a point in time and said, I really don't want to support this, but hey, I think that all these criteria are met. Do I have to vote this way? It's like, well, if you don't and you think all the criteria are met, then that's not really acting as a judge, right? I mean, I can't tell you what to do or how to make your vote. But that type of situation, if you didn't vote, based on that would lead to a possible challengeable outcome. And that's what we try to avoid because we want to have all these decisions upheld. And so it's, a matter of taking everything back to the criteria that you're reviewing. I'd say those are the best things that a board can do when they're in these type of hearings, knowing, first of all, what kind of hearing they're in and what are the standards that they're looking for. What are the standards that are to be applied? What are the standards that you're going to hear evidence on? And that's the best prep that anybody can do for any one of these hearings. Consideration of evidence, board deliberations, board members, you only consider the testimony of witnesses and the exhibits admitted in the record as evidence. Now, in Apopka, we don't have, hey, I'm entering this in as evidence. But, we've talked quite a bit about what competent substantial evidence is, and that's, of course, what you make your decisions on. And then just some general information. Really, we kind of talked a bit about this before. You're not bound by the strict rules of evidence. We don't have that courtroom standard of informality of laying everything down. But you do consider evidence, whether it's direct or circumstantial. You can make your deductions and reach conclusions which reason and common sense lead you to make. And at the end, you weigh that evidence and give each piece of evidence the weight that you see fit. And that's important too, because you're judging, what you're hearing, you're judging how important it is. That's sort of the, I don't want to say minutia, but the smaller component of taking a look at that. It's you heard evidence. Well, are you giving more weight to the applicant's evidence? Are you giving more weight to the affected party's evidence? Are you giving more weight to staff's evidence? What's the quality? You have the ability to decide the quality of the evidence, I suppose, is a good way of saying it. Who do you find to be the most credible? Who are you going to follow? Who are you going to, basically believe to make the decision that you need to make? So in the consideration of evidence, you can exclude evidence or testimony which is not relevant. I think we've seen some of that before where you say, hey, hold on, listen, applicant, member of the public, even staff in some cases, look, what you're saying really isn't relevant here. We're considering this criteria. Let's keep it on point to, these elements. I've seen that happen with this board before, and that's worked well. You determine relevancy of evidence. You can ask, again, the attorney who's present, whether me or anyone else, for opinions on relevancy of evidence. Typically, that's not something that most boards need to do. It may, if it happens, then fine. We can talk about that during the hearing. We can, basically kind of put things on pause and talk about a little bit about what we need to do to get through it. And another thing to remember is that really anything you may hear of course, we saw it tonight, anything that attorneys say will never be evidence. That can be persuasive, and they'll be referencing and discussing evidence, but attorneys don't give evidence per se. They're not producing evidence. They may be providing information or backup information or presenting information from a report to you, but the report is the evidence, not what the attorney's telling you.
Let me ask you a question. When a developer,
Yes, sir.
When a developer comes in here and says, which I consider as a threat, says, well, we can either do this project or somebody else could come in here and do a assisted living, no, not assisted living. Affordable housing. Affordable housing, threatens that. I mean, to me, that's not relevant, and that should be excluded.
Well, I think what is important to keep in mind, too, is if you're looking at an underlying land use, and what you probably the best example is what we were talking about tonight. Whether you have a planned development or something that's used by right, one of the things to consider is, well, relevant or not, ultimately, if someone has a use by right, they can always do that there. And If there is an opportunity to make a change where there is more control, that's not an evidentiary issue, no, but it does factor into your decision, I think, a little bit, as to, at least it could, as to, depending on, a lot of this is, it's difficult to talk about and difficult for me to put in words because everybody has sort of a different standard of, best way to say it, you all have different opinions on a matter. Maybe not all the time. I mean, you don't necessarily all have different opinions on a matter. But the point is, that's not an evidentiary issue, but it is relevant to your decision, at least to consider the fact that, well, this person can do this by right. You're still supposed to be considering the criteria, right? Does it meet all these criteria, your checklist? Well, let me put it to you this way. Are you saying it's the threat that you want to have excluded, or what's, tell me a little bit more about your concern, and maybe I can try to say this a little bit better than I am.
I feel like it's a threat, the way they present it, so we can either do our project, or somebody else can come in here and do the affordable living.
Affordable housing, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Affordable housing.
And I mentioned
And then to me, it's like that's the worst case scenario. We're going to discriminate against affordable housing. No, that's not the way it should be. And that's not, to me, it's not relevant. To me, it's a threat.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. Right. I mean, ultimately, as I said before, you're considering criteria. You're going through A through G. That's what you're there to consider. But you're also considering what the current use by right. You see, in the context of a rezoning, what you're considering is, hey, is the burden met? Do I have the ability to say no to it? Because once the applicant has met their burden, the burden is on the city to, maintain the status quo, right? So what you would be considering is, well, all right, we're looking through these criteria here. Is it better that it stay this way, or is it better that we go to, this with this type of zoning since all the criteria have been met? So you're still considering the underlying zoning. That is relevant, if that makes sense.
To me, I'm sorry, I totally disagree. I think that's discrimination, and it's not relevant to what they were trying to do tonight.
Well, I'm not speaking, and one thing I don't want to do, I don't want to talk about the details of, what we heard. That wouldn't be appropriate. But it is directly relevant what an underlying zoning is, because you're considering a zoning change. And so the threat, no, if you're hearing a threat, that's not relevant. It never would be. Threats are not appropriate. And of course, there's a different degree of what someone would consider a threat versus a threat. And this could be a very long conversation. We could go around in a lot of circles talking about it. But at the end of the day, the underlying zoning is always relevant because we're considering a change. And so I think it's a matter of presentation and what you prefer, and hey, anytime there's a threat, if something's a threat, the board has the ability to say, hey, you do not threaten us. That is inappropriate. You will not threaten us here.
I think, from what I experience in this process is, as I look at the current master plan, I look at the current zoning of a piece of property, okay? I have to look it up because I don't have it all memorized. So I what's this? Okay, that's the definition. And I try and get a picture, okay, with that zoning, what can be built? And if you Google, there's some suggestions of things. They don't say you can build a Wendy's, you can build a Burger King. They don't say that. They talk about, this can be, daytime business, this can be 24-hour business, that kind of thing. I think what happens sometimes is that when we're asked to evaluate a different zoning, it is almost impossible to not take into account what the person who's presenting and asking for the new zoning to be, because at the same time, we're actually looking at some rendering plan. They're not the official last plan. This is an artist rendering. This is it. Now, for example, the individual tonight, they actually have physical pictures of a place that they've built. So those weren't computer generated. Those were actually physical pictures. But they look, here's what a drawing would look like supposedly, that type of thing. So it's very difficult at that point to go, oh, well, I see that that's this, but I don't want that. But then, I don't know that I want a,
A commercial complex too? I mean, I brought that up.
I'll use one because I know it's actually happening and it's already been, a Floor and Decor, a Floor and Decor mega center that, brings semi trucks and, that type of thing. But yet, because of the zoning, that would be allowed because that is allowed within that zoning. So an individual that has, the property and, it's, essentially all property is essentially agricultural or rural agricultural to start with, and then eventually gets, at some point. And this is depending on who you talk to, is a contentious issue. The bottom line, Apopka actually has something that other locations don't. We have open land.
Yes.
And we are in a proximity to Mount Dora and Apopka and Orlando, et cetera. And there are some natural boundaries. But if you just drive up 441, and if you think, oh my goodness, what's happening in Apopka, drive up 441 to the east side of Mount Dora. What's happening coming this direction on 441? And at some point, it's kind of a natural function. It isn't a natural function if you're 100 miles from anything. You're agricultural, and the chances of you being agriculture your whole lifespan are good. But there are people that were here years and years ago when it was just agricultural, okay? And it is not that anymore because of the, Florida is Florida.
Right.
I want to live here. I'm tired of the snow. I mean, we talk about snowbirds. So when we look at zoning or the change of zoning, I think sometimes we get confused about, okay, this is zoning. It has nothing to do with, now when the zoning request is to multifamily 20 or multifamily 25, that's pretty designated, okay? It's, pretty, specific designation. The thing that, and I really appreciate your presentation and your future presentations on this, one of the things that I would also find very helpful would be the zoning designations and the changing of a zoning designation to another thing. What specifically does that, how does that intertwine itself, and what does that mean? I can read, I understand agricultural to multifamily. Okay, I know what that means. But when you go from that to that, and it has that, you have the master plan, we see it, it's color coded, et cetera, and that type of thing. For me, that's fairly simple for me to understand. You're not going to have an industrial, zoning, and then all of a sudden somebody comes in and says, I'd like to have a single family home right there, in the center of everything that's orange or whatever the color is going to be. However, Senate Bill 102 really changed a great deal in the state of Florida, in the state of Florida. Whether I agree or don't agree or disagree, that was debated way above my level and above my head. I do know there are municipalities in the state of Florida that are taking very dramatic action in relation to that. But it's just, I think that's what sometimes is confusing. It's hard to not sit there and know what would be built there.
Sure. And I think that, like I said, I don't want to take up your whole evening. We can talk about some of the stuff very, very briefly right now that really, I think, hits those high points, because there's a lot of great stuff that you just mentioned that we can unpack here. The first thing I think to remember is, hey, when you're looking at conceptuals and you're looking at drawings, a level where you're talking about zoning or planning, anything like that, that's salesmanship. You know, that's simple salesmanship because developers know that, hey, ultimately people want to see what things are going to look like. The general public wants to see what things are going to look like. This is what we have in mind. And there's nothing wrong with asking that. That's one question I hear from just about every board. Well, where do you want to go with this? And you know, somebody might say, well, we're just at the planning level right now. And somebody's like, well, what do you want to build there? They just want to know, because ultimately that's what people who sit on boards, the community, what everybody cares about, right? And it takes a long time to get there through the process. To kind of talk a little bit about some of the things that you mentioned, that whole ag, you know, transition and that change, you know, that starts on the planning level, going through that whole comp planning thing. And that's important to bring up here because those those decisions always legislative. The standard of review is different. You have a situation there where it's fairly debatable is the standard. I'll explain that in a second, versus competent substantial evidence. So when you're looking at a legislative planning level decision, you got ag, you got, you know, agricultural land. Somebody wants to come in and build a massive skyscraper, right? Planners are going to look at consistency. They're going to look at, you know, is this going to be supported in this area, making this change? You're going to hear all of that. It's not testimony because it's legislative, right? And the decision that's made by the final decision-making body, by city council, and you're part of the legislative process, this board as well, that decision is upheld if it's fairly debatable, which is a much less stringent standard than competent substantial evidence. So it's a lot easier to say no on the planning level than it is when you have to go down the whole evidentiary standard. As long as there's a conceivable reason to say, hey, you know, this is not really a good idea, we don't want to make this change, courts are going to defer to your decision for the most part. You know, what I keep on saying but, you know, to a governing body's decision. There's a lot of ability to say no, as long as reasonable minds could come to different conclusions. You can say no in planning decisions, in those legislative decisions. That's why it's important to know what standard you're being held to, what type of process is going on. And now, in the whole quasi-judicial thing, it's got to be supported by that competent, substantial evidence, each of those criteria. Otherwise, if we get to a court, they're going to say, oh, no, we didn't see like the right evidence that we need. That can be overturned. A lot easier to kick that out. But on that planning level, that's where the big protection is. That, unfortunately, that's not a lot of times where we see everybody showing up and, you know, getting angry about something. That's already happened. Well, then it's harder to make your arguments. You know, the planning decision level has already been made. So excellent point there, and a good way of addressing it and discussing it. And then, yes, the whole new elephant in the room now are some of the changes in basically the attack on home rule authority that we see on the state level. And as I go through some of these presentations, you know, any way that you cut it, that's bad for local government sovereignty. I mean, local governments are deterioratingly losing their ability to make decisions that's being taken away from the state. And as, you know, a representative of local government, I think that's bad. And most people on local decision-making boards would think it's bad too. But now, of course, you have a decision where, really, that planning level decision becomes super important, because as soon as it changes to one of those standards, commercial, PD, or whatever, then yeah, somebody can come in and build affordable housing and you can't say no. Under certain standards, you know, to certain, because of how the bill works, certain levels of intensity. So it's a game changer.
And I understand, you know, what you felt from what he said. I think one of the things we lose track of is people tend to work under the assumption that that development company owns that land and this is what they want to do. They haven't even bought it yet.
Right.
They're buying it contingent on being able to do that. So when he says, if we can't do this, then we'll move on to something else, and then it'll very well become commercial, or it could be the affordable housing. And I think he's laying out, here's the options, because they don't own the land. They can very simply walk away. The only time and effort they have is just what they've spent with the planning commission here and with staff and doing their paperwork. They can walk off. And now those people have already decided to sell the property. And, you know, from my experience, when somebody's decided they're going to sell, if Joe doesn't buy it, they'll sell it to Bob or whoever, the next guy comes along. That property is going to be developed.
It's
Period.
options.
I mean, it's going to be developed. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but within 5 years, somebody's going to buy it and build something. And I think what he was saying is, if we do this, you have control over it, it'll be this. But if it's commercial, and that's not, I don't think it was really a traffic study, it was a traffic comparison, but the traffic comparison showed how much more traffic would be if it's commercial. Don't know if I bought that 100% or not, and saying that it could be these other things, because again, fundamentally, they're not locked into anything other than the time and effort they got into. So I think kind of what he was saying, we'll walk away, and then somebody else is going to come in and either make it a commercial truck depot, or somebody maybe will, you know, use the new law to go in there and inflict that on us. So I think that's more.
I just don't think it's relevant to their project.
Well, no, and I think it is relevant because it says, okay, if we don't do this and we go away, this is the next two options. Everybody wants, oh, that property there that's all trees behind my house, I want it to stay trees. Well, the only way that happens is you buy it. Okay? So if the people don't want that development, that piece to be developed, they need to pool their money and buy it, and then they have control. Other than that, they do not. So our decision is based on, okay, what's the best thing going forward for this piece of property? Because in my experience, and even in the past, if a piece of property gets turned down, the zoning, okay, we're not going to let you do multifamily here. 6 months later, 8 months later, a year later, boom, it's sold and somebody does something else. So that property is going to be developed. And you know, with the homeowner, you know, I have woods behind my house. I don't ever want them to go away. They will, sooner or later. And that's just the way it works. And, you know, kind of my answer to that is, well, guess what? Where your house was woods at one time too. So, I think we just missed the point that they don't own this property and that it's going to be something. It's not going to stay the way it is. And people have a hard time accepting that, well, I moved here and there was all woods around my house and it's not going to be that. Well, it's never going to be that way unless you own the woods, period.
There's always at least one person or two or three people that always ask for every project, what could go there if this doesn't go in there? And there's, like I mentioned, there's always options for every single property. You know, like I know that gentleman brought up the Live Local. And by the way, the Live Local, it only requires 40% to be affordable, 120% of the EMI. So that's like a single person earning $60,000 a year.
Yeah, I did want to interject the Live Local, Senate Bill 102. I think it's 7 or 8. There's 7 or 8 specific criteria that must be met, or it's not considered the Live Local.
Right.
So it's not some just random.
It's not a magic. It's not a magic wand to allow for affordable housing.
And I understand they make it hard to do that. And I don't think that the issue is not that it's affordable housing. To me, I don't care one way or the other. The issue with me is that you have zero control, that we're going to come in your city and we're going to build this. And because some guy up in Tallahassee voted for it, you have absolutely no say-so on how we do this.
Yeah, we
And
don't
that's
get that
just
review.
100% wrong. It's 100% wrong. I disagree with that. And hopefully it'll go through the court system and get squished, but that's the reality of where we're at now. So, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, we got to get rolling.
I said I wouldn't go on a rant, I lied.
There is some litigation going on right now. It's in its kind of infancy stages, so we'll see how it develops. You know, there's going to be some. I think a couple things there. You know, I mean, you know, knowing what could go someplace, and the folks that ask, well, what could be built here? That's knowing the stakes. That's knowing the stakes of a decision. You know, something else. Someone saying, well, we'll just pack up and go down, whatever. You know, that's not evidence. That's argument. You know, argument of showing those stakes. So, kind of putting a label on what's going on there. But it is important to know the stakes and what the use by right is on a particular land, of course, is always the first thing to be aware of when you're, looking to make a decision to change something. And there's just no doubt about it. I mean, we could spend a lot of time. I'm doing a presentation on Live Local tomorrow, and we could talk about it for about 2 hours and how awful it is. And I'm sure some good will come of it because there is a need for affordable housing. That's why the legislature did it, but at the expense of the sovereignty of local governments. So it turns into a political issue to have that discussion. But at the end of the day, it certainly is a game changer in land use law. kind of start wrapping things up. This is kind of coming back around to what we already talked about in the public providing input to the board. It's not a matter of sentiment, it's a matter of looking at criteria. And I thought that was the last slide. Credibility of witnesses, that's your ability to discern, who to believe, some of the things we already discussed as far as components of competent substantial evidence. Just some things to keep in mind, asking yourself whether the evidence was there tending to prove what the witness testified to, whether you believe them, whether there was some kind of evidence of falsity or something that wasn't said. And you have the ability to elicit testimony and ask those questions, which this board is very good at asking good questions and getting the answers that you want to hear. Sometimes there's expert witnesses, no expert witnesses in any of the matters tonight, but one important thing to remember, and since we brought up traffic studies, that's not a witness, but merely because an expert witness has expressed an opinion doesn't mean that you have to accept that opinion. Same with just any other witness. So if there's something in a traffic study that you don't believe, you for whatever reason you don't find to be true, you can question it. Absolutely, absolutely. Same thing if, brought in a land use expert, to testify to, one of the components of special exceptions or variances. Just because they're an expert, they're there too, to try to accomplish a goal. Their testimony is, and most experts are going to answer as truthfully as they can, but they're still there. They're hired experts to accomplish something. And that's all I have for you on this matter. If you have any more questions for me, we've had some good ones. I'm happy to answer them.
No, thank you for that. I
Thank you
enjoyed
very
it.
much.
I think
Yes,
I would have
definitely.
enjoyed being in your law class.
Yeah.
Can we get a printed copy of this?
Yes,
I've got this available. I'll email it to you.
Okay, thanks.
thank you.
You just got to remember what he said before you saw it.
All right.
Well, some of the other topics are going to be on sunshine law and other ththings. Just the city has asked me to go over those. It's a good idea for all boards. I mean, it's something I do for all the boards in my jurisdictions. So if you're reviewing the slides or think of something, can ask me in another one of these sessions. You can just shoot me an email or something, or give my office a call. I'm happy to flesh anything out or talk about this a little bit more with you any way that you want. You're welcome.
Great, thank you. Sir, you are not recognized to speak. You're not recognized to speak. You had a public comment session, that's it. You understand?
I understand.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Old business. I wanted to go on the record with this, the discussion about the Orange County roads and the impact fees, and in communication with them, found out that while they don't do a road study is a bigger overview, but they do have traffic counters. I'm kind of marked them out all over Apopka and the surrounding area. They have traffic counters, and they're not the ones that you see across the road where it's there. They're ones under the road, but they have traffic counting going on all the roads, and especially in the area you were talking about. For the last, I think some of them went all the way back to 2012, and some of them started 2016, and it shows the actual amount of traffic on the road. It's an actual physical count, and the average cars per hour and all that. So I would retract what I said about Orange County not paying any attention at all. They actually do, and they measure it, and they have you can go into their thing, and I printed out the different roads back there and got some information on, this one goes back all the way to 1999, Plymouth Sorrento Road, from Lake County line to Kelly Park Road, average volume 545 an hour, annual traffic study, most recent 2022, 8,795 cars. So all that information is available, and they are tracking it. So just wanted to go on the record with that they do track that, and they are looking at it. Now, does that mean they're going to react to it? No, but they do know the traffic counts there. And I did look at, I believe there's 3 other roads over there by the Golden Gem Road that you were talking about. They have a traffic counter on Golden Gem. Let's see, Plymouth Sorrento, average volume is 353. Kelly Park is 405, and Kelly Park is in horrible condition. Plymouth Sorrento, 584. Round Lake Road is 707. Kelly Park Road, 244 on the north end. Kelly Park on the, between Pond Can and Kelly Park, or I'm sorry, Round Lake is 301. And then Round Lake between King Avenue is 131. Round Lake, Orange Blossom Trail, 205. Binion Road, 323. And Golden Gem Road's 33.
All of that information.
2022 is the most current they have. And so I understand when they say, well, you know, that's not a priority. Well, that's a very low traffic count. And what they relayed to me is that the developments on either end of that road, the traffic is traveling out to Kelly Park Road, or on the other end, they're not traversing the road. But when you look at the traffic counts there, I kind of understand it. You know, I understand. And while you have a valid point that, you know, that the road does need to be fixed, Kelly Park Road to me is in horrible condition, and it has a massive amount of traffic.
It's much wider though.
Right. No, I agree.
You can't fit 2 trucks on the road.
Right.
On the-
Well, and they're all their trucks. But again, if you, backing away from it, if you're a traffic planner in Orange County and you're looking at all these roads and all the traffic numbers, you look at a road and everything around it, every other connecting road between Kelly Park and down are at 300 or 400 or 500 average trips per hour, and this one's at 33.
Yeah,
Which
but-
one are you going to react to?
But, but it's increasing. You can drive down Golden Gem Road. You can see where the traffic is driving off the edge of the road onto there's no shoulder.
I'm not disputing
It's tearing the.
I'm not disputing, I'm
It's
addressing the point
The
of the Orange
Golden Gem
County
Road's
traffic
actually getting
study.
narrow. They're losing, the edge is falling apart.
Yeah,
'cause
it looks
cars
like a
are
dirt
driving
road
it,
that got paved.
And
I
they're
get it.
driving on the sod next to the road.
I understand. I'm
You
not,
can
I'm
drive down there and
not
see it.
disagreeing that the road
It's just a
doesn't need
safety
help.
factor. It's not the, it's not how many cars go down Golden Gem Road. It's the safety factor, how inadequate that road is.
Okay. That's your point.
Yeah.
However, again, for the city to spend $4 million to fix that road, you know, or the Orange County to spend $6 million, and the $2 million wasn't to repair the road, it was just to repave it. I did find that out too. We're gonna chip in $2 million to redo the whole road. They'll spend the $2 million to repave the road and restripe it, not widen it or make it up to standards. And that was my understanding. So my point is, the reason I wanted to bring it up is because I found out that there are, looking at the roads, and the reason why, you know, as much as I usually disagree with Commissioner Moore when she said that's not really a concern, I understand that. And again, you know, it's personal to you apparently, or it's a big deal to you, but I think Golden Gem Road, when they're looking at the numbers and they see 33 cars an hour, and they can look right over here, an eighth of a mile away, the same kind of road that has 450 cars an hour, which one are they going to pay attention to?
It's not the same kind of road. It's completely
There's a
different.
lot of factors that go into every road. It's not just the
My
traffic,
point is
it's not
being that
just
they
the road
do
construction.
Monitor all
There's-
these roads. But again, that doesn't change the fact that if we want to do something about the roads, then that's not us to do that. It's not even the city council to do that. The Orange County has to do that. And the interface between the city of Apopka and Orange County is actually, according to our code, is Mr. Hitt. Not the mayor, but Mr. Hitt is the guy that's supposed to communicate with Orange County on the road issues.
It's,
Right.
So
That's correct.
it's not our place in no way, shape, or form. So, I mean. I
It's
looked,
it's
I went
it's a
and did
staff factor, and like
research
I
and dug
mentioned,
into
it's
it.
multiple things that go into the roads. It's not one thing or the other. It's a combination of the road condition. It's a combination, you know, how much is it going to cost? What is the actual repair facility? Is it scraping and repaving? Is it widening? Is it putting in sidewalks? How much traffic is going there? What the conditions are cumulative for different developments that are going in around the area. That's the same thing with schools. Everything is
Reactive, not proactive.
correct.
And that's,
And-
I mean,
and that's because of the
if
growth
traffic
factor that
is
we-
high enough, they'll fix it.
That's because of the growth factor that not just Apopka has, but every other city has.
That was it. That's all I got.
Okay.
Anything else? Meeting adjourned.